When you look back at a lot of the great NBA teams and a lot of the great playoff runs, often you focus on the teams that ended up winning it all in those years. We obviously remember the 2016 Cleveland Cavaliers that came back miraculously from a 3-1 lead. But what probably won't be remembered, maybe this isn't the best example because this is one of the most famous championships of all time, but what we might not forget is how dominant they were as a team and how they were leading in Game 7 heading into the fourth quarter. And a few plays had it been different, they could have easily ended up with back-to-back championships, and this was before Kevin Durant came. This was not a team that was just formed artificially. This was a team that was formed through good draft picks and great player development, the likes of Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, and then some good pieces around them. This was a great team and a great franchise, but we'll always remember them for blowing that 3-1 lead, and people will always bring that up, regardless of if Steph Curry ends up with 5 rings or whatever he ends up with. What about how the bad boy Detroit Pistons were robbed of a championship in 1988? No one's going to remember that. They were up 3-2 against the Lakers, leading in the final few seconds, and they call a foul on Bill Laimbeer that was just clearly not there. There's plenty of examples. The 2002 Sacramento Kings, this was in the Western Conference Finals where we saw one of the most lopsided displays of refereeing, officiating in NBA history. It was just a joke. Every call went the Lakers' way. Everything seemed to go against the Kings, and if the refereeing had been remotely even, they probably would have ended up in the finals and they might have won a championship. Now, following on that last point, I'm not trying to say the Nuggets were robbed. I mean, some people would say that, no, they weren't the better team throughout the series. They could have easily brought it to 6 or 7, but they just didn't take their chances and a few things didn't go their way. But it wasn't the refereeing's fault solely. There was a few decisions that were questionable, but let's not blame it all on the officiating. But let's forget about the officiating and let's forget about the Lakers series. Let's look at the run the Nuggets had up until the Western Conference Finals, because it was something special. It was something that we really haven't seen. It was something that's never been done before. Their team broke records. Individual players broke records. It was just an incredible run under incredible circumstances, and I think that should be remembered rather than them losing in 5 to a powerhouse team like the Lakers. Quickly before I get into the video, if you could drop a like right now, that would be much appreciated. Really does help out the videos. I know it doesn't seem like much, but it does help out quite a lot. So anyways, let's get back into it. Now, heading into the first rounds of the playoffs, the Nuggets were favored by most to win that matchup, but it had more to do with the Jazz's struggles from a lot of people I heard, their lack of Bojan Bogdanovic, and them just struggling throughout the bubble. And despite being a top seed in the West for 2 consecutive seasons, having the best center in the league, and emerging point guard, and a host of role players that had performed fantastically over the course of the year, people still had very little belief in the Nuggets, citing their lack of a go-to scorer as a reason, or their lack of a superstar. I mean, Nikola Jokic was just sitting right there in front of your face. He'd done it in last year's playoffs. He'd done it throughout the regular season. But let's not get into a whole debate about that, because we know how I feel about that. Nikola Jokic is the best center, top 10 player in the NBA, superstar, go-to scorer in the clutch. He's a guy that you can rely on. Just because he's 7 foot, moves very slowly, and has an unconventional shooting style and just an unconventional way of playing doesn't mean he's not a superstar, doesn't mean he's not one of the best players in the league. But let's put that to the side. Even with people favoring the Nuggets over the undermanned Jazz, they gave Denver absolutely no chance to come back after going down 3-1 to the red-hot hands of Donovan Mitchell, who seemed to be making every shot and was out-dueling Jamal Murray, who was almost doing as much but just wasn't quite doing as much as Donovan Mitchell. But after being counted out following 3 consecutive losses, the Nuggets then overcame the Jazz in 3 consecutive games, and there were some historic stats to come out of this series, and in particular some historic stats between Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell, and just Jamal Murray in general, because he had the playoff series of his life. He had one of the best playoff series you'll see from a guard, full stop. It was just incredible. And here are some of the stats. Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell joined Allen Iverson and Michael Jordan as the only players to put up 50 points in 2 playoff games throughout one series, and as a result they became the only players in NBA history to do so in the same series. Mitchell and Murray combined for 472 points, which was an NBA record of points by 2 players in the same series, beating out a record that stood for over 50 years. And then there's just some other Jamal Murray stats that didn't quite break records, but were close to doing so. He was the first player since Michael Jordan in 1993 to score 3 straight 40-point games in the postseason. He was the second player in 20 years to have 3 25-point halves in one playoff series, joining Allen Iverson. His 142 points over 3 games were only bettered by Jerry West and Michael Jordan over the course of the last 60 years. the third best 3-game playoff stretch of all time from a scoring perspective. That's a pretty impressive stat, I'd say, for someone who was playing in his second playoff series and someone who hadn't made an all-star game beforehand. You can also add into the fact he tied the record for most made field goals in a playoff quarter in NBA history with 9 made field goals against the Clippers. He just broke records, he just set records, he just matched records. He put himself among the very best in pretty much everything he did over the course of the first 2 series, and then he followed that up with some amazing games against the Lakers. Jamal Murray was clearly one of the best players in the playoffs, and it kind of came out of nowhere. He went from someone who didn't make the All-Star team to an absolute superstar. But after Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell made history in the first round and the Nuggets overcame a 3-1 deficit, their playoff run went from impressive to just flat out ridiculous. After getting blown out in Game 1 against Kawhi and the Clippers, people had already called the series. I saw people tweet that Luka Doncic put up more of a fight than the Nuggets by himself. Just Luka Doncic by himself was putting up more of a fight than the Nuggets. The series was over. Denver got lucky against the Jazz. They couldn't match the Clippers' firepower. And that was after 1 game. So you can imagine when they went down 3-1, despite being close in all 3 of those games following the first game, people were heaping the disrespect on Denver and had more than counted them out after the 3-1 lead the Clippers took. And the odds of the Nuggets coming back from 3-1 in 2 consecutive series, well, I mean, there were no odds because it hadn't been done before, so I don't know how you calculate the odds for something that had never been done. So they broke history there. But the odds of them doing it were just remarkable from coming back 3-1 down in 2 consecutive series, 3-1 down against the championship favourite when you're the underdogs. And just to make it even better, down 14 points halfway through Game 5. The Clippers team, the Clippers bench, the Clippers wives and girlfriends were celebrating the game. It was over. Everyone thought it was over. The series was over. People were just getting ready to see the Clippers versus Lakers show off. And the Nuggets didn't just win 3 games in a row against the Clippers. All 3 of those games they trailed at the half, including by 19 points in Game 6, where it looks like the Clippers might finally wrap it up. Came back from 19 points down. They came back from being down at halftime in Game 7 as well. And in doing so, they set another record, becoming the first team to come back from 3 15-point deficits in elimination games. They also tied the record for most postseason wins following elimination with 6. And that was over the course of 2 series. And then let's just add another one. Nikola Jokic became the first person to record a 20-rebound triple-double in Game 7 of the playoffs. Now, I mean, these numbers are normally kind of stretched out, like 20-rebound triple-double Game 7 of the playoffs. It's kind of a unique stat. But if you look at the only 2 other players to record 20-rebound triple-doubles over the course of any playoff series, any game in any playoff series, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, 2 of the 4 best power forwards of all time. And Nikola Jokic put himself in that company and did so in Game 7. I think it's an impressive stat nonetheless, regardless of it being kind of a stretch to set it as a record. Now, I don't know the exact odds of coming back from 3-1 against the championship favourites after trailing by 14 points halfway through the 3rd quarter. The odds of the Nuggets winning Game 5 would have been incredibly slim alone, just them having to come back and win from 14 points down after they'd lost 3 games in a row, but let alone come back and then win the next 2 games. The 6th one in which they trailed by 19 points, the 7th one in which they were trailing and had to come up against Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and they pulled it out the bag. Like, this is a remarkable playoff run that should never be forgotten, because despite them falling short in the Western Conference Finals, they came back from 2 3-1 deficits and did so in a fashion that just might never be replicated. This might never be seen again, particularly the leads they came back from and the way in which they did it with Jamal Murray just scorching Nikola Jokic much the same. It was just an incredible showing from a team that had 1 player over 30, and that was Paul Millsap, who didn't really provide much except from his 10-0 run that he had in Game 5, which I mean did help out, but he's getting paid $30 million a year to score 7 points a game in the playoffs or whatever he was doing, so let's not heap too much credit onto him. As I've said, the Nuggets made history in pretty much every way imaginable, coming back from 2 3-1 leads, Jamal Murray scoring 142 points over a 3-game stretch, putting himself in the company of Jerry West and Michael Jordan, Nikola Jokic recording a 20-rebound triple-double in Game 7 against the favoured Clippers. Pretty much every way you look at it, individual records were getting toppled, team records were getting toppled, and the Nuggets did this in just 2 playoff series. Imagine if they had somehow managed to overcome the Lakers. Who knows what they would have pulled out in the finals. Who knows what other records they would have set, but all I know is this Nuggets team is for real, and they'll probably be around for the next 5 to 10 years with Nikola Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., and Jamal Murray leading the line, and who knows what Bol Bol's going to provide. They could also set a record for being the biggest team in NBA history, with Jamal Murray the only player under 7 foot on the floor when they have Bol, Michael Porter Jr., Nikola Jokic, and whatever Jeremy Grant or whoever runs the 2-guard position. Anyways, I just thought I'd look through some unique records that Nuggets either broke or tied or put themselves in the same category as over the course of one playoff series. You got to keep in mind the things Jamal Murray was doing that were comparable to other players. These were over the course of 30-year spans between two of the best players of all time. And he did this over the course of 2 playoff series, actually over the course of 1 playoff series against the Nuggets, and then broke another one against the Clippers. It's just not ordinary things that this Nuggets team were doing, and I think it deserves a bit more credit. As always, if you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Sub to the channel, trying to make videos like regularly. Other than that, catch you next time.